Hi there guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 22 Reviewed. This video is out a bit earlier than normal, and you can probably expect that to continue, because for the foreseeable future, I'm going to have a lot more free time on my hands, so I do intend to work harder on this YouTube channel and get videos out more often. So if you guys want to see that, be sure to let me know by liking the video and subbing to the channel. That way it justifies me putting the extra effort in. Anyway, onto the subject of this video. The show is just chugging along at this point, so not much to report about the production of the season really. Next season there is some spicy stuff to talk about, but that will have to wait. I'm just hoping for an improvement of some sort here, as season 21 was a bit lackluster. I'm also still waiting for the first HD era episode to get a 5 out of 5, so maybe, hopefully, this season can deliver on that front. Anyway, as ever, I would like to thank the Simpsons wiki for their help with the trivia. Give them a browse if you want to know anything Simpsons related. And with that said, let's move into these episodes. Season 22, Episode 1, Elementary School Musical. Marge sends Lisa to a performing arts camp to inspire her to embrace her creative side. So my trivia here is that there is an episode of South Park which aired prior to this one that is also titled Elementary School Musical. And my best moment here was the roofie reference, and it kinda says a lot when that's the best moment. Indeed, the season opener gets a 1 out of 5. Bland, dull, boring, those are the type of words which best sum this up. Lisa's time at art camp was a bit of a letdown. They could have gone deeper into her love of art, and maybe even given her a new hobby or something. None of that happened though. Instead it turned out to be mostly a sham, and we had to put up with these two art geeks feeling sorry for themselves, all while making lame Subway references. The subplot here did not fare any better, it simply made no sense. For a start, how could they fake a Nobel Prize award for Krusty anyway? And even if they could, why would they let Krusty go for doing one good thing if he has done so many bad things to them in the past? Sorry for being a bit unenthusiastic about this episode, but it was just a mess really, and when you add in some annoying songs and a lack of any funny jokes, you have a dreadful start to the season. Season 22, Episode 2, Loner Lisa. When Grandpa gives each member of the family some of his savings, Lisa invests in Nelson's brand new business venture. Meanwhile, Marge buys a luxury handbag. So my information about this one is that the 2009 Disney Pixar movie Up is parodied in P.U., which was an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon Lisa and Bart watching a car. And my best moment here was Principal Skinner and Superintendent Chalmers wanting to go and work for Nelson. This one is a 3 out of 5. The core story here of Lisa donating to Nelson, which causes him to start a business, is one which I feel had a lot of potential. However, due to quite a bit of filler in the episode, as well as the final message being a cliche stay in school, it never fully lived up to it. I mean, we never fully got into the Nelson stuff until almost halfway. Instead, a lot of time was devoted to a Homer and Marge plot about buying expensive items, then returning them for a refund. In fairness, that did have a few okay bits, like Lou undercover in a fancy restaurant, but nothing came of it in the end. I do think they would have been much better devoting more time to the main story. Nelson could have been fleshed out a lot more here, and why not have Bart get into it too? He could have been one of Nelson's employees. I think that could have worked quite well. What we did have was fine, don't get me wrong. Nelson trying to be a bit more creative was fun while it lasted, and the ending with him and Lisa skating was a nice one. The jokes were okay, I suppose. I didn't care for Mark Zuckerberg's appearance, but there were a few decent moments outside of that. As I said, my favourite one was Skinner and Chalmers' desperate attempt to suck up to Nelson with the sleeveless shirts. Season 22, Episode 3, MoneyBART. Having been convinced to try some extracurricular activities, Lisa ends up managing Bart's Little League team. They have instant success, but Bart starts to resent her managerial style. So for any of you date geeks out there, this episode aired on October 10th, 2010, which is also, of course, the 10th of the 10th, 2010. The best moment for me was the ending. This one is a 4 out of 5. The way this episode started, I didn't think I was gonna like it. It looked like it might shape up to be another Home at the Bat or Bart Star ripoff. However, I liked the direction it took, with Lisa adopting a stats-based approach to management. Most sports have gone much more stats-orientated in recent times, so it was good to see Lisa push that to the extremes. And let's face it fits perfectly for her nerdy, geeky personality. Of course, that is in direct conflict with Bart's personality. All he desires to do is have fun. Because of this, I found the conflict in the episode fairly natural, and the ending where Bart teaches Lisa some of the fun of the sport was a nice touch. The jokes here were okay overall. I did not care for yet another joke about Milhouse's parents being siblings. They need to cut that out already, they're using it far too often. What I did enjoy was Mike Socha's return. It was a very nostalgic cameo for me, especially given I've just finished watching Homer at the Bat again for my top Simpsons episodes video. I also enjoyed Lenny's remark about Carl knowing all of the answers since Obama got in, as well as Maggie easily getting the better of Lisa at fencing Zorro style. So yeah, an episode I enjoyed overall, certainly much more than I expected to. Season 22, Episode 4, Treehouse of Horror 21. The 3 short stories this year are War and Pieces, Master and Cadaver, and Tweenlight. My trivia here is that Professor Frink introduces the show, giving a warning about the content. This is the first time that we had an intro like this since Treehouse of Horror 5. My best moment here was seeing what the different games did to the townspeople. This year's Treehouse of Horror is a 3 out of 5. It wasn't quite as good as the last two, but it also wasn't a terrible special either. The first part was probably my favourite. It was interesting to see how all the games come to life and how they interacted with the characters. There was also a lot of vibrant colours and some good animation on show. I also appreciated how the segment was not overly gruesome for the sake of it, but was not afraid of going there when the situation called for it. Rod and Todd getting squished is what sticks in the mind there. I definitely think they struck a good balance overall. The second segment was okay. I enjoyed it just for how bloodlusted and cynical Homer was. However, it didn't offer much in the way of jokes outside of the fake out nudity ones, and the whole poison story was a bit convoluted. But what do you expect for something that was all in Maggie's imagination? The final part was at least watchable, but in my opinion was still the weakest of the three. The vampire type story was very cliche, and not much new was brought to the table. Some of Homer's antics were okay at least, as was Bart's pathetic attempt to impress the girls. Overall, this episode was an okay watch, but it definitely lacked some standout moments, and was not as funny as I would have liked it to be. Season 22, Episode 5, Lisa Simpson, This Isn't Your Life. Lisa is enrolled at Cloisters Academy, and soon learns the truth about why Marge became a dropout. Meanwhile, a series of coincidences leads everyone to consider Bart as a new school bully. So the song playing just before Bart gets mud all over Nelson is Metal on Metal by Canadian heavy metal band Anvil. And my best moment here was seeing what happened to Marge's grades after she met Homer. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This was another episode which was solid enough and tried to give us more of a look at what Lisa really wants and what she really feels about Marge's lifestyle. I do feel like this borrows material from a handful of previous episodes, but I can forgive that as I at least tried to give it a different angle, and I think they succeeded for the most part. Of course, we know that Lisa wants to create some kind of legacy for herself, and not just be a housekeeper, but at the same time, we know that she does respect Marge as a person, and you kind of get the feeling that it does cause Lisa a bit of internal problems about how to discuss this with Marge without upsetting her. The ending was fine, and Lisa of course decides that it's not fair for Marge to go through all this work just to please her, very much like Lisa's pony in that regard. The subplot was okay, I guess. It was a nice idea to have Bart inadvertently beating up Nelson, however the payoff to it all is not that great. The bully dynamic between those two is already kind of sorted by this point, so it's kind of hard to shake that up anymore. Comedy wise, again, this is not particularly funny. As I said, it was good to get clarification of how Homer dragged Marge's grades down in high school, but not much other than that. I also have a minor nitpick about this episode. It revolves around the gag of Homer throwing money away, trying to get a toy for Maggie. I understand it was purely a joke, but it does create a bit of a disconnect when the main story is about the family not being able to afford college for Lisa, but here Homer is earlier in the episode, literally wasting tons of fuel to try and get a toy. In this case, I don't think the joke was funny enough to justify taking away from the plot. Season 22, Episode 6, The Fool Monty. After Mr. Burns starts to suffer from amnesia, Homer and Bart establish a schedule for the townspeople to keep him for half an hour each day. The episode title is a pun on the film The Fool Monty, and my best moment was the cat flu virus hysteria at the start. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. I didn't like what this episode was getting at for the most part. I mean, yes, we all know Mr. Burns is an evil character, but to have the whole town basically take turns abusing him is not something I particularly wanted to see. Of course, he instantly snaps out of his trauma the moment that Lisa tries to be nice to him. That was not very convincing, but of course I had to return to the status quo. The way he got hurt in the first place was also dumb in every way. For a start, I don't buy that Burns wanted to kill himself, and once he did go through with it, how the hell did he survive getting hit by a plane? Just too much silliness there. Once again, I give a general answer regarding the jokes. I thought they were lackluster and did not find them funny. The only reason this does not get a 1 is I found some of the satire at the start to be interesting and thought-provoking, with the whole virus thing and how it was pushed on people in the exact way to amp up their fear, and indeed the over-the-top way which people reacted to it. Given what's happened with the last few years, we know exactly what that's all about. Now, just to clarify before anyone jumps down my throat over this, I'm not saying that COVID was like the virus in this episode, that it was completely all made up. I'm merely just pointing out some of the similarities between how the media and the public acted in this episode and how they acted in real life just a few years ago. Just a thought exercise, really. Season 22, Episode 7. How munched is that birdie in the window? A pigeon crashes through Bart's window, and he nurses it back to health. But after Santa's little helper eats it, Bart has a hard time coping with the loss. So my trivia here is that the supposedly dead ostrich opening its eyes is a reference to the giant chicken fights in Family Guy, and you can tell this because the same music is even played. My best moment here was the start of the episode with the storm. I gave this one a 1 out of 5. This gets a 1 because not only did I not enjoy it, I don't even think the episode knew what it wanted to be. I mean, what is the point here? It is clearly not Bart bonding with his pigeon, given that he hates birds at the end, due to the ostrich incident. Is it a Santa's Little Helper story? I mean, maybe, but he was not the main focus here for much of the episode, and the ending where Bart forgives him was shallow as hell. I'm not a fan of his stories at the best of times, and this is probably the worst one yet. There was even a few scenes with Lisa about her not liking pigeons, which ended up being a waste of time, as nothing was done with them. Once again, not a funny episode at all, with lame stuff like Milhouse sulking behind a fence, and the strangling of the ostrich. The only decent bit was at the start. I liked the contrast between how Ned comforted his kids, compared to Homer. Ned makes his comment about angels bowling. Meanwhile, Homer is there, coming up with this dark story to try and scare the kids even more. Not an episode I would want to watch again though, unfortunately. Season 22, Episode 8, The Fight Before Christmas. We get told 4 Christmas tales from the Simpsons family. So, my trivia here is that this is the first time that the entire family is seen in 3D. Homer and Bart had previously been seen in 3D in Treehouse of Horror 6. My best moment here was the puppet ending. I mean, it is the most memorable bit after all. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This episode, with all the different moving parts, did get a bit boring at times, and not all the stories were created equal, but there were a few good moments scattered throughout, which get this to a 3. Let's start out with Bart's story, which was a spoof on the Polar Express. It was pretty by the numbers stuff, but I did enjoy the ending, of the crusty Santa tricking Bart into thinking he was broke. The second story about World War II was not great, but I did like how the map of Europe looked like Marge. I must admit though, the Martha Stewart segment never did anything for me, but the breakfast in bed, when it hasn't been made yet, was a nice little gag. The fourth and final story was the best one. The puppets were looking good, and the Muppets reference was also nice to see. Abe and Jasper as Statler and Waldorf was my favourite for sure. The Katy Perry stuff with Moe was weird, and it's probably best just to leave it at that. So overall I found this to be a very uneven episode, with ups and downs and spikes in quality, but it did have enough good stuff to make it just about worthwhile. Season 22, Episode 9, Donnie Fatso. Homer is sentenced to 10 years in jail, so in order to reduce his sentence, he agrees to infiltrate Fat Tony's mob undercover. A bit of trivia about this one is that on one of the days in the calendar, you can see that Nelson has the same tree Charlie Brown has in A Charlie Brown Christmas. And my best moment was Homer and Moe stumbling into the performance of The Wizard of Oz. This one is a 1 out of 5. There were a few things which really bugged me in this episode. The first is that this episode once again felt like a mashup of previous ones. It had Homer being a snitch from the 7 Be a Snitch, having a role in Fat Tony's gang, which both Homer and Bart have done in the show. There was even a bit of trouble with Trillian's crossover, as Homer takes a government deal to get out of prison. So, since the episode felt stale, the actual plot would have had to have been very good to win me over. Sadly, it wasn't, as they just had Homer do a few jobs for Fat Tony, until the snitch reveal gave Tony a heart attack. Now, the decision to kill Tony off was not doomed to fail. It could have been made interesting, I think, but when you just bring in another character to fill in the same role almost straight away, it not only cheapens the impact of the death, it also cheapens the character going forward, which leaves a pertinent question: why bother doing it? At least that's how I feel about it. Once again, the jokes were not up to snuff. I really wish they would stop with the Fox jabs at this point. It was fun at first to bash Fox, but it's just getting repetitive now, and it's coming across as petty. As I said, the best bit here was Homer and Moe somehow finding themselves in this play by going through the back of Moe's. It was a surprising turn of events, and Moe's straight but confused reaction to it was pretty good. Still doesn't save this episode though. Season 22, Episode 10, Mums I'd Like to Forget. Bart discovers that a 5th grader has an identical scar to him. Marge tells him that she was friends with 3 women years earlier, and Bart was friends with their sons. So, this episode's title is indeed a reference to the slang term MILF. I never thought I would be saying that about The Simpsons, but there you go. My best moment was Bart pressuring comic book guy by threatening to destroy a comic. This one is a 3 out of 5. Parts of this were interesting. For a start, it was good to see some 5th graders, as they are rarely ever seen on the show, and their rivalry with the 4th graders was an interesting way to start the episode. Once things progressed though, it moved from being about Bart and his friends to being more about Marge and the so-called cool mums. That was alright for a time. It's always nice to see Marge get out and about socializing. There are just a few silly things within the story to stop it from being truly solid though. For a start, the scar the 4 boys had was not only unrealistic, it's also hard to swallow that it's never been mentioned before up until this point. The ending is also quite predictable. Marge gets fed up with her group of friends, and Bart also gets tired of his. So they all go their separate ways, never to see each other again. The jokes were hit and miss, which at least means that there were some good ones. I enjoyed Bart getting comic book guy to spill the beans by telling him he would destroy a comic. Of course, he would not be able to tolerate that. I also found Ned's twirly mustache in a flashback to be a nice touch. Some of the misses include all the gags about Homer with the other dads. That happened 3 or 4 times, and it amounted to the same awkward silence every time. The Moe Skype jokes about him having Bell's palsy was also not funny, and was maybe even in bad taste, to be honest. Season 22, Episode 11, Flaming Moe. Smithers helps Moe build a popular gay bar, but he soon gets offended at Moe pretending to be gay. Also, Bart gets roped into helping Skinner with a woman. My trivia here is that Moe had previously had the idea to give the bar a gay makeover in Days of Wine and Dozes. He said, to stay afloat, this bar's gonna have to go queer. And my best moment was the callback to the other Moe's bar changes. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This was okay for what it was, but the main problem with both stories is that you knew how they would end. Regardless of what happens in the first few acts, Moe's will go back to normal, and Skinner will return and still be a mama's boy. So what I tried to do was forget about the implications, and just try to have what fun I could with it. And in fairness, there is some good stuff to be found. It makes sense that Moe would say whatever it took to keep his gay bar going, and I'm glad that they never took this in a serious direction, where for example Moe was going around being this beacon for gay people. If anything, he does not quite know how to handle the situation which he has got himself into, and that kind of confused bewilderment is much more believable for someone like Moe. Smithers had some okay moments, and let's face it, you can't blame him for stopping Moe getting elected leader based purely on a lie. The Skinner subplot was quite basic, but it had its moments. I actually liked Bart's scenes more. Him having to hang out with this loopy 3rd grade girl was interesting to see. You can tell on Bart's face just how frustrated he is by it. As far as the jokes, this episode was not laugh out loud funny, but there were a few okay moments. I thought Lenny's line about the other employees thinking they are better just because their report states that fact was quite good. And as I said, I also liked how they mocked the amount of times that Moe's bar has changed. Season 22, Episode 12, Homer the Father. Homer becomes addicted to an 80s family show and starts behaving like the father in the series. So my trivia, again relating to Itchy and Scratchy, is that there is an episode of a show called Ain't I a Stinger? And that's a reference to Bugs Bunny's quote, Ain't I a Stinker? And the best thing about the episode for me was just the parody of 80s sitcoms. I wasn't quite as mad about this as Homer was about the 80s sitcoms, but I still liked it regardless. And as such, it gets a 4 out of 5. The idea of Homer spending all of his time watching old 80s television, which he takes all of his life lessons and parenting advice from, is so believable. So much so that I'm shocked they've never done this before. In fact, both Homer and Bart were well portrayed here. Homer is trying his best as a parent, but he is still very flawed at it. Whereas Bart felt much more like a kid here than he has done in recent times. He just wants his new bike and will do whatever it takes regardless of the consequences. The bit about Bart giving nuclear secrets to China in exchange for a dirt bike was not the most realistic thing ever, but good moments came from it, so who cares? One of those good moments was the ending of Homer's knowledge being used to build a plant, that of course instantly blows up. The other funny joke to come from this was you pledge allegiance to the flag, and the flag is made in China. I mean, he kind of had Bart there, didn't he, really? My favourite thing here, though, was the 80s show that Homer watches. They really nail what they were like to a T. The fact that Homer was actually a more functional parent after copying an 80s sitcom, though, is hilarious, but it tells you all you need to know about his competence. Season 22, Episode 13, The Blue and the Grey. Marge discovers her natural grey hair and decides to embrace it. Meanwhile, Homer becomes a Valentine's Day wingman to Moe. So, when Marge gets to the club, the song of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz plays. And the best thing here for me was Bart and Lisa freaking out about their hair. This one is 3 out of 5. I didn't mind finding out that Marge's hair is really grey. In fact, if I recall correctly, it may have even been stated in a previous episode. I am not a huge fan of everyone in Springfield making a big deal out of it, mind you. It kind of made it feel like Marge was letting everyone else decide her hair colour for her, which is not an ideal way to live, really. I suppose it had to be done though for her to get back to her blue hair. The side plot of Homer being Moe's wingman, I never really got into. It didn't really connect well with the main plot, even though they tried to make it so, and the whole thing just fell a bit flat. In a rare change of pace, this episode actually had a few decent gags, which helped my enjoyment a bit. The joke of Patty and Selma's real hair colour was so silly that it worked. Lisa's exchange with Homer about feminist empowerment was also quite snappy. My best moment though was indeed Bart and Lisa stressing about their hair. I loved that tapping on the fourth wall, as they finally understood after all these years just how nonsensical their hairline actually is. Season 22, Episode 14, Angry Dad the Movie. Bart is offered a chance to make a short film based on the old Angry Dad character that he created. It soon wins several awards, but Homer is taking all of the credit. So, things parodied at the awards show include Toy Story, Cars, Wallace and Gromit, The Lion King, among many others. And my best moment was the different types of animation in the cartoons, as you can see in that Pixar parody right there. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. There's not much to this episode in truth, just that a company offers to make a movie out of Bart's old cartoon, and Homer starts taking the credit for it. The writers seem to devote more effort into creating these animation shorts than they did actually making an engaging storyline. Ultimately though, I think they just about get away with it. I can mostly forget all the Homer and Bart stuff, because we have seen this type of behaviour from Homer before, so it was always likely that he would make it right with Bart in the end. What I stayed here for was the different cartoon clips. They were all interesting and well done, my favourite of them being the Pixar parody Condiments. They also got in a few jabs at these Hollywood award shows and how meaningless they really are. Nothing else to say here. Not a great episode, but one which still has a bit of creativity. Season 22, Episode 15, The Scorpion's Tail. Lisa finds a desert flower called Silver Tongue that, when applied to humans, calms them and makes them happier. However, it also has an eye-popping side effect. So my fact about this one is that Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote are referenced in the intro of this episode, and my best moment was the German guy being revealed to be Augustus Gloop. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This episode was standard in the first few acts. Then it decided to go crazy with the revelation that the drugs were making people's eyeballs pop out. Now I was surprised by that, no doubt, but I was kind of expecting a twist of some sort. After all, Bart had just started selling the drug to people, so it was fairly obvious that it would create some kind of conflict. As far as my opinion on all the eyeball stuff, it was silly, no doubt, and probably, in an ideal world, not what you want to be seeing on The Simpsons. Sadly, the point is that this is not an ideal world, and certainly not an ideal show anymore. So after this long, I don't blame the writers for trying something out there, instead of repeating the same tired plots again and again. So my problem with this episode wasn't so much that it was silly, it was that they never really made it fun. Outside of some initial shock value, there was nothing there. No real jokes of note, which is surprising given the situation. There were a few jokes tried at the start with the field trip, however they were mostly lame and overdone, like the rock climbers. The one about Nelson apparently masturbating behind a cactus was an eyebrow raiser for sure though. I have no further comment on that. The German guy apparently being Augustus Gloop worked for me just because it was so ridiculous. That was the only good thing about that character, because they never made use of his pharmaceutical background. They could have got in some good satire about that industry, but instead treated it with kid gloves. Overall, I have a grudging respect for this episode for not being scared to try things, but it still needs to be a lot better than this for me to actually like it. Season 22, Episode 16, A Midsummer's Nice Dream. Comedians Cheek and Chong break up as comedy partners. Homer becomes Cheek's new partner. Meanwhile, Lisa and Marge help the crazy cat lady clear up her house. So this episode's title is an obvious parody of William Shakespeare's play A Midsummer's Night's Dream, and my best moment was Homer's fantasy. This episode got a 2 out of 5 from me. This was an annoying rating to give, really, because this episode had a potential to be better. Cheek and Chong were an interesting duo at first. After they stopped working together and instead hired Homer and Skinner as the other's replacement, I expected this to end in some kind of ratings war between the two shows. None of that actually happened though. Instead, the Skinner staff had like one scene of how boring he is, and it was just as boring for the viewer. The Homer stuff with Cheek was slightly better, just seeing how bored Homer got with this guy. The fantasy sequence of him getting weed was pretty good, and was well animated too. The last act was a major disappointment though, and nothing came of their partnership in the end, as the two entertainers made up. The subplot of Marge helping the crazy cat lady clear up her house also had potential. I just don't think making Marge a hoarder out of nowhere was the right way to go. It never brought up any character moments or anything, so it just felt like a waste of time really. The jokes here were again not great. Homer is the only one who even came close to being amusing. Season 22, Episode 17, Love is a Many Strangled Thing. After embarrassing Bart in front of the town, Homer attends a parenting class. While there, he gets punished by being strangled himself. This leaves him in a fearful state around Bart. Some trivia here is that a take on the Jackson 5 can be seen in this episode, where Homer is Michael Jackson and Bart is his father, Joe Jackson. My best moment was the therapy sessions. This one got a 1 out of 5. An episode focusing on Homer's incessant strangling of Bart was probably overdue, let's be honest. But if the rating didn't give it away, I don't think it was handled very well. If you're going to do this big setup of Homer embarrassing Bart in such a way, then I expect there to be some meaningful interactions between the pair in the episode. Instead though, after Homer had a taste of his own medicine with a strangling therapy session, he did stop strangling Bart, and after what Bart went through, he should have accepted that as a win and moved on. Instead, he took pleasure of exploiting Homer's new weakness at every turn. I didn't even know it was possible to make Bart as unlikable as Homer in an episode centered around Homer strangling him, but this episode somehow managed it. Things got so muddled by the end too. After all of the different counselor scenes, and that pointless Marge and Lisa scene, I didn't even know what it was trying to say anymore. When you add to this some jokes which were not funny, and others which were in bad taste, like the hanging joke, you have yourself an episode which fails in almost every way. Season 22, Episode 18, The Great Simpsina. Lisa meets a famous magician named the Great Raymundo, who teaches her some of his magic tricks. But things go wrong when she gives away his greatest trick to his biggest rival. So a factoid about this one is that the milk can escape was one of Harry Houdini's most famous tricks. The trick is also considered dangerous in real life, as there are records of magicians who have drowned trying to execute it. And the best moment for me here was the ending. Lisa becoming a magician gets a 4 out of 5. I did not have high hopes for this when it opened up with that annoying Peach song, but thankfully things got better as they went on. For the first time in a while, I got a story between two characters who I actually cared about in the context of the episode. It makes some degree of sense that Lisa would actually have some talent as a magician, and it also makes sense that she would be interested in pursuing it, especially after she gained some popularity doing it. Of course, that proves to be to her detriment, as she gets tricked into giving up Raymundo's best secret, but I digress. The reason that moment actually had some impact was that the friendship between Lisa and Raymundo was authentic, and you really believed that they had a connection. It also helps that we were given a bit of his sad backstory. That made you want to root for him and Lisa to succeed together. The ending was a good one, with Raymundo saving the fraud magician, and then giving a stage to Lisa. The ending shot of him dancing with his late wife was also a nice moment, even if it was drug-induced. So yes, the story was very solid here. The episode was unfortunately not funny enough for me to be able to give it a 5 in good faith, but there were still a few decent moments, such as Homer getting caught up in a net when he went to talk to Raymundo. Season 22, Episode 19, The Real Housewives of Fat Tony. Fat Tony and Selma fall in love and get married. Meanwhile, Lisa uses Bart's nose to hunt for truffles, so the title here is of course a reference to the Real Housewives of reality series. And my best moment was Plopper going berserk after finally getting to eat a truffle. This one is a 3 out of 5. This episode was nothing fantastic, but it at least never did anything much wrong. Even though the episode Donnie Fatso takes some getting over when it comes to the character of Fat Tony, Liz does a good job of easing us back into the normal way the character operates. Most of the interactions between Selma and Tony are good, both when they first meet at the DMV and after they get married. Now, their marriage was obviously not going to work out in the end, but I'm glad that they had a few happy moments together at least. The anger between Marge and Selma felt a bit tacked on, but I suppose I get the idea of there being some resentment in the back of their minds without making it the big deal of the episode. The subplot of Bart sniffing out truffles was a bit pointless too, but the ending to it of Spider-Pig messing up Luigi's restaurant was quite good. There were above average moments here by this season's standards. It was good to see the Noiseland arcade again, for example, and Homer had a few sarcastic lines about Patty and Selma, which were quite snappy in their delivery. Season 22, Episode 20, Homer Scissorhands. Homer suddenly becomes a hairstylist after he beautifully cuts Patty's hair. Meanwhile, Milhouse falls in love with a 5th grader after Lisa refuses to be with him. My trivia for this one is that this episode's title references Edward Scissorhands, a 1990 film starring Johnny Depp and Vincent Price. My best moment was the ending. This one is a 4 out of 5. I think both stories here have their merit. Homer having this secret talent of being a hairdresser does take some believing, but it does allow for him to interact with many different people of Springfield. This includes getting all the juicy gossip from his friends' wives and partners. I am totally sympathizing with Homer, as their constant chatter slowly drives him insane. That kind of nonsense would take its toll on me too, if all I wanted to do was work and earn some money. Because of this, I was glad that he and Marge hatched a plan to cut ties from his haircutting business forever. The Lisa and Milhouse story was not the most complex thing ever, but Lisa being the one to get obsessed over Milhouse was a new look at their dynamic. The final bit where Taffy breaks up with Milhouse was maybe not fully earned, but whatever. I guess we have to buy that she somehow sensed that Milhouse was not fully over Lisa. It was made worthwhile though by the sweet moment at the end. Seeing Lisa finally kiss Milhouse felt like a surprisingly big deal for the show, to be honest. I'm just glad that we got a proper happy ending for once. And everything's coming up Milhouse was a nice way to wrap it up. The jokes were, like last episode, fine, which makes them above average for this season. I liked Homer silencing Maggie as she was about to speak, and the bit where Lisa was so excited to show Bart her new boots was a cute little moment. Maybe the most solid episode of the season overall. Season 22, Episode 21, 500 Keys. The Simpsons find hundreds of keys that lead them in different directions all over town. So my trivia here is that this is the second episode to show Otto crashing a bus full of children off a bridge and into water. He previously did so in Das Bus. And the best thing about the episode for me was just the way the whole story connects. This one is another 4 out of 5. I think of this as a worse version of Trilogy of Error. That's not to say this was bad or anything. After all, Trilogy of Error was a very good episode. It is more like this episode goes for that branching story involving all of the family members. I did like the setup of finding lots of keys in a drawer while trying to get Maggie out of the car. I also think that the individual mini-stories all had their worth. Yes, even Marge's one. It was so aggressively pointless that I found it amusing. Homer with the Duff Blimp was good fun, as was Bart's stuff. Lisa was obviously the main focus here, and I did enjoy the little mystery for the most part. I think Skinner and Chalmers' obvious shadiness sells it quite well. As is often the case, those two produce the episode's funniest moments as well with their petty banter, such as Chalmers commenting how he is always talking about the Simpsons kids, or explaining to Seymour that Bart has his car keys. The whole mannequin explanation wasn't the best reveal ever, but hey, it's not like they were ever really going to have got 24 kids killed. Mind you, they did let Otto think that he killed them, which was a bit dark for sure. Overall, I did enjoy this. All the stories had their moments, and they came together reasonably well in the end. Season 22, Episode 22, The Ned-liest Catch. Edna Krabappel is placed in a teacher holding facility for slapping Bart. When Bart helps her escape, Ned Flanders saves her from a falling ladder, and they begin dating. My trivia here is that this episode's title is a parody of Ned-liest Catch, and the best moment in the episode for me was Santa's little helper refusing to damage Bart's homework. The season finale gets a 3 out of 5. The pairing of Ned and Edna may seem a bit random at first, let's face it. The two don't really seem that compatible. If anything, that provided a bit of an opportunity for the writers to play these two off each other. Seeing Edna sticking up for Ned against Homer is very cool to see, and you also see that she will take some getting used to Ned and his kids' lifestyle. As far as Ned goes, it is understandable given his faith that he would have a problem with Edna's past relationships, but the end of the episode shows that he is willing to look past that to get someone special in his life again. As for the fan vote at the end, I guess it was a nice idea to give the fans a chance to make a real change on the show. I am also glad that they voted to have them stay together. In hindsight though, it is a little sad. Due to the death of Marsha Wallace, the couple only got to be together for a few seasons. Still though, I hope they were able to get at least some mileage out of it during that time. This episode was a little light on jokes overall due to the focus of the plot, but there were still a few moments of significance. Edna smacking Bart felt like a long time coming. And as I said, the funniest bit here was the joke with Santa's little helper. How he went out of his way to not only refuse to damage Bart's homework, but also repair it when Bart tried to feed it to him. So that's every season 22 episode done, and here is a season summary. The overall average score is 2.72, which is a new record as the lowest so far. My bottom 5 episodes of the year. The Fool Monty gets in there as the only 2 out of 5. Then we have 4 1 out of 5s for the first time ever. Those being Donnie Fatso at 4, How Munched is that Birdie in the window at 3, Love is a Many Strangled Thing at 2, and just because it was incredibly boring, Elementary School Musical was the worst of the year. The way in which I ranked the top 5 episodes, and it was very easy because there was only 5 4-rated episodes, goes as follows. Home and the Father was 5th, MoneyBART was 4th, 500 Keys was 3rd, The Great Simpsina was 2nd, and if I had to pick one as the best, I probably would pick Home and Scissorhands. So yes, my rating does match my feelings on this season. I think it is the worst so far. It was just the least fun I've had watching a season of The Simpsons. Now the worst of the worst here was quite bad. However, the worst episodes of say season 11 for example, I actually disliked more than the worst episodes here. It's just that season 11 had a lot more funny moments and was not as boring for as long. This season really started to drag at around the halfway point. But in fairness to it, things got a bit better towards the end. In fact, the second half of this season just felt more adventurous than the first in all regards, and it did salvage the season from being a complete train wreck. In terms of how the characters fared in this season, Bart, and especially Lisa, got a much bigger presence throughout. Towards the start of the season, I thought this had become the Lisa Simpson show for a second. It was an interesting change of pace for sure, but it's not one that was sustainable in the long term. As far as the tone and direction, again I feel it was split into 2 halves. We got a fair few standard character plots in the first half, while in the second, we had more format changes, like 500 Keys and a Scorpion's Tail. We even had a fan vote to end the season after all. In conclusion, this is not a season I would ever really want to see again, but I am still glad I watched it, as it is one more box ticked off on this project. If you guys enjoyed, then please like the video and sub to the channel. It means a lot, especially as I have a lot more free time at the minute to focus on the channel. That is me signing out, thank you to all who watched, and take care.